These cinnamon rolls are soft, fluffy, sweet, and decadent, filled with gooey brown sugar and cinnamon and topped with a cream cheese glaze. They're a hit with everyone, and I'm sharing with you the ultimate recipe. Welcome to Recipes by Karina, where I share with you how to make classic and simply delicious recipes. Make sure to subscribe for a new video each week. These cinnamon rolls make the perfect Sunday brunch, and one of the great things about this recipe is you can make the buns in advance the day before. Put them in the fridge overnight, bring them up to room temp the next morning while you preheat the oven, and bake them until they're golden brown. It doesn't get much better than that. We're going to start off by making the dough for the buns. You can do this by hand by using a stand mixer or in a bread maker, whatever you have or what is more convenient for you. In a small bowl, add the active dry yeast and warm milk. Mix these together with a spoon and leave for about 10 minutes to rise. You can also add a half teaspoon of sugar here, which will help speed up the process. We'll need 3 cups or 375 grams of high-grade, strong or bread flour. Make sure you are using this type of flour instead of all-purpose, as it contains more proteins, which in turn will produce more gluten, which is what makes the texture of bread quite different to the texture of a cupcake. You'll notice I give the recipe amounts in metric and imperial, so no matter where you live in the world, this recipe should be easy enough to follow. If you would like the full recipe for these cinnamon rolls, it will be on my website, as well as the full measurements in the description box below. To the flour, measure out a 1/4 cup or 30 grams of granulated white sugar. This bread dough isn't quite a brioche, as we don't want the flavour of the bread to be too powerful, but it is enriched with quite a few ingredients than what a standard white bread is. Measure out half a stick, a 1/4 cup or about 55 grams of butter, salted or unsalted, and place it into the bowl. Make sure your butter is pretty soft so it will incorporate well into the bread dough. You're also going to need some salt, a little more if you've used unsalted butter. Check on your yeast mixture. If it has foamed up and looks bubbly, it's ready to be used. If it hasn't, you may need to give it a bit longer, or your yeast may be out of date. Pour it into the bowl with the other ingredients. Lastly, we'll need an egg. Crack it into the bowl that was used for the yeast and whisk it up using a fork. Pour it into the mixing bowl and we're ready to combine the dough. Either turn on your bread maker to the dough setting, turn on your stand mixer on a low speed, or begin to mix the dough using a wooden spoon. Let me know in the comments below if you've made bread recipes before, or if working with yeast makes you nervous. Bread can take a few tries to get perfect and to really understand yeast, but it's not too difficult. A couple of things to keep in mind is the temp of the water, or in this case milk you are using, as well as make sure your yeast is in date and not expired. The dough will take a few minutes to come together properly, but once it does, make sure to check if it needs a little more flour or a little more moisture. It's hard with bread dough for it to be exact every single time, especially when you are using an ingredient like eggs that do vary quite a bit in size, as well as flour, which can have very different moisture contents. You don't want the dough to be sticking to the bowl. It may stick slightly to the bottom, that's fine, but it shouldn't be a complete mess. It should come together in a ball and be able to be touched without having a string of dough form between the ball and your finger. If it's too wet, add a few tablespoons of flour, giving it time to incorporate before you test again. Again, you don't want dry bits of dough at the bottom of the bowl. This would mean it needs more moisture, so add a tablespoon of water at a time until it's about perfect. The dough needs to be kneaded for around 10 minutes or so until it becomes smooth, and when it is lightly pressed, it springs back. When it's at this stage, lightly oil a bowl so the dough doesn't stick, shape it into a ball and cover to leave to rise in a warm place for about an hour or so until doubled in volume. This time can vary depending on the temperature, so check after about 45 minutes. While the dough is rising, we can get started on the next part of this recipe, the filling for the rolls. There are 2 ways you can do this: mix up a paste or just sprinkle all of the ingredients over. I like to mix up a paste. I find this easier to spread, as well as make sure all of the ingredients are evenly distributed. In a smaller bowl, add your butter. You'll need a stick, 110 grams or half a cup. Make sure your butter is extremely soft, as this will need to be spread. If you've just gotten it out of the fridge, you can melt it instead, as it will have time to firm up a little before we roll out the dough. To the butter, measure out 2 tablespoons of cinnamon and a cup of brown sugar. You'll also need a good pinch of salt if you are using unsalted butter. I'm usually always using salted butter, so I'm going to skip this step. Use a spoon to mix the paste together and making sure all of the ingredients are really well combined, and leave it uncovered at room temp until it's ready to be spread onto the dough. When your dough has doubled in volume, flour a work surface and turn the dough out. Knead it a few times just to knock most of the air out. If it's sticking quite bad to your hands, make sure to use a little more flour. This dough recipe works great for many different sweetbreads like pull-aparts, scrolls, sticky buns, and many more. So if you're thinking of trying something other than cinnamon rolls, you can use this dough. We want to roll it out into quite a large rectangle, and this is easiest done using a rolling pin. If you don't have one, a wine bottle actually does a pretty good job here too. We want it to be about 40 by 20 cm or 15 by 10 inches. It helps if you've got a ruler here, as this is going to determine the size of our cinnamon rolls. Of course it doesn't need to be exact, just around this measurement. I'm also using a dough scraper here just to define the corners a little more, but you can also use your hands. Once you're pretty happy with the shape, take your cinnamon and brown sugar paste and add it on top of the dough. Use a spatula and spread it over in an even layer. If you've chosen to not make the paste, instead spread the butter over and then sprinkle over the cinnamon and brown sugar. Spread it out evenly, getting to all of the corners. This is why it's important that we have pretty soft butter to make sure the step is as easy as possible. It may seem like you don't have enough of the paste, but we don't want a thick layer, so keep spreading until your dough is evenly covered. This is for basic cinnamon rolls, but there are a couple of ways you can change it up here or add something a little different. One of my favourite additions is cubed up apples. They pair perfectly with the brown sugar and cinnamon to make an apple type scroll with salted caramel sauce on top. You can also use raisins or sultanas, a few different spices. It's completely up to you. Start with the longest side of your dough and begin to roll it as tightly as you can. Start at one side, do a small section before moving along, and try and get it as even as possible. We want to keep the roll pretty tight. This will just help your cinnamon rolls keep the best shape, as well as keep all of the filling perfectly inside. Don't worry too much as you roll if the sides are looking a little uneven, just cut those ends off. We want 8 pieces, so cut the roll in half, each half in half, and each of those halves in half again to make 8. There are a few tricks with using floss instead of a knife, but these rolls still have to rise, so any dents will pretty much disappear, so I've never found it worth it. Place each of your rolls in a greased baking dish. I'm using a 30 by 20 cm or 11 by 8 inch, but something similar will work perfectly. Make sure to space them evenly as they will rise. Cover the rolls and place them somewhere warm for about an hour or so, or in the fridge overnight if you are making these ahead of time. After the cinnamon rolls have risen, they are ready to be baked. If you put them in the fridge overnight, let them come up to room temperature for 30 minutes to an hour before putting them in the oven. Bake the cinnamon rolls at 180 degrees Celsius or 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes. While the rolls are baking, quickly whip up the cream cheese glaze. I wouldn't skip this part. The rolls are delicious, but they really do need this glaze. In a medium-sized bowl, add the room temperature cream cheese and butter. Using a hand mixer or a whisk, beat the butter and cream cheese together until soft. You don't need to whip it, just incorporate them together, making sure there are no lumps of butter or cream cheese. Add in the icing sugar or powdered sugar. These are the same thing, just different names depending on where you live in the world. Use the mixer again to mix the sugar in, just enough until it's incorporated. Lastly, you'll need some vanilla extract and about a tablespoon or 2 of milk to thin out the glaze depending on what consistency you would like. You can have it quite thick or thin so it can be poured over. It should be soft, smooth, tangy and sweet. Remove the cinnamon rolls from the oven and leave them for about 5 to 10 minutes to cool so they aren't burning hot. Spread the glaze over the top, watching it melt down the sides. Alternatively, you can serve the cinnamon rolls and let everyone spread over their own glaze. These are best served warm a few minutes out of the oven, but they can be reheated if you do have leftovers. I hope you try out this recipe and send me a photo. I would love to see a picture of your recreation. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this recipe and I will see you in my next video.